Thanks to PUBG Mobile for sponsoring a portion of this video. When it comes to Apple and Google, the perception that they are enemies is for fanboys, commenters, and keynote fodder. The reality is these two companies need each other, and they work much more closely behind the scenes than anybody realizes. Nothing represents this weird relationship more than the upcoming Pixel 6. Let me explain. So, before you jump down my throat in the comments calling me a ton of names or whatever for suggesting that Apple is at all responsible for the upcoming Pixel 6, hear me out. I think if you do, this will make a lot of sense, and it all comes back down to the age-old saying of follow the money. So it's not like a huge secret, but the Google line of phones has changed over the years. The OG Pixel phones, the Nexus line, was still some of my favorite phones of all time, and I think it's really hard to argue with the greatness that was the Pixel 2. But since then, Google has been struggling to find an identity for the Pixel line. And it looks like the Pixel 6 is shaping up to be a triumphant return for Google. So I think that kind of got us down the rabbit hole of asking the question, like, why now? So like I said before, follow that money. So the biggest one here is Google search. It's, you know it, it's the biggest search engine on every iPhone. And Apple didn't put it there out of kindness of their own hearts. Apple makes a boatload of money from Google off that deal. And for a long time, we didn't know how much that was until a recent Wall Street Journal article uncovered from a US Justice Department lawsuit that, just take a guess before I tell you how much Google pays Apple every year. If you guessed between $8 and $12 billion, you'd be correct. And that boku bucks actually amounts to between 15 to 20% of Apple's yearly revenue. And that translates to about a third of Google Alphabet's profits per year. So a ton of money for both companies and really high stakes when it just comes to search. So clearly this is an investment on Google's part, right? You don't pay that amount of money without getting something back. And they clearly make way more back than that from collecting on Google Ads, services, probably some personal information that are on over the billion iPhones that are in circulation. But what if Apple decided to pull out of that deal? So before I finish getting into why Google needs Apple, I do want to take a minute to thank this video sponsor, PUBG Mobile, and their latest 1.5 update. You probably already know PUBG Mobile. Chances are you've got it on your phone, but the new update adds a ton of awesomeness that you may not know about. So the first big one for me was there's a Tesla angle here. They've actually integrated Tesla inside of the game. So first, there are 4 gigafactories now in Erangel. You can activate the switches on the assembly line in the factory to start the whole assembly process. There's also the other Tesla stuff you'd expect. It's actually autopilot in there, and I guess I can actually now call it self-driving since it's inside of a game. The Tesla angle I think is a really cool collaboration that got me back inside of it. It was something new. I drive a Tesla, so it was fun to sort of see that world inside of my phone. Aside from the Tesla stuff, like Erangel itself has gotten a pretty big update. There's 6 new areas in it. There's military defense, energy utilization, transportation, logistics, and a pretty cutting edge scientific research section. New gameplay mechanics are here as well. You've got dynamic infrastructure. They took these urban areas. They're gonna feature dynamic moving mechanisms. So there'll be like elevators and automatic doors. Those are things that are totally new. So if you've played the game, you know Erangel is a giant map. So like the Tesla angle, well, it's like a cool collaboration between 2 different entities, is handy because autopilot will actually take you from like one area to the next. Essentially, the 1.5 update is the game you love, just more of it and more things you can do. It took a really great game and made it even better. Added new angles, new areas, and improved on things like you'd expect with pretty giant updates. So if it sounds awesome to you, update your app store if you already have PUBG Mobile installed. If you don't, we'll put a link down below to get the app rolling on your phone, tablet. It'll work perfectly on iOS and Android. What if Apple decided to make their own search engine or limit the amount of ad revenue that Google can make from the iPhones? Well, both of these things are kind of actually already happening. So Apple's larger focus is clearly on security. That's sort of the hill that they are marching up. It seems like a hill they're going to stay on for a while, and especially when it came to iOS 14.5's release, which drastically reduced the amount of information a company or app can sort of track on you, or at least give you a choice to figure out whether or not you want to opt in. And of course, companies sell that information for a huge amount of money, Google being the biggest player, or at least one of them. And on top of that, there's been a lot of talk for years about Apple developing their own search engine, and that would become obviously the default search engine on the same billion iPhones. The problem with that is that Google search is crazy good and completely ubiquitous, meaning it's everywhere. And it would be really hard for Apple to compete with that right out of the gate, building a search engine from the ground up. Look at how long it took Siri to become usable versus Google's Assistant. Clearly the information that Google is gathering while they're making money from it is also being used to better their product. Apple would more than likely have to buy out an existing search engine like DuckDuckGo and then build it up from there. So with one of these two things kind of already happening, and the second probably seems inevitable, to me it seems that Google is aware of the writing on the wall. That Apple is going to go the route of making their own search engine, and they are looking to sort of hedge their bet as they move into the future. So I think the logical thing for them to do would be to take your Pixel line more seriously. Why rely on Apple to sell 1 billion phones when if you do it right, perhaps you can get there as well? And the huge amount of revenue that Google is making off ads from the iPhone, imagine what they could make from a phone that they're making themselves where they have full control. So take what previously seemed like an afterthought, the Pixel line, and make it a priority. Hence, the Pixel 6 and Pixel 6 Pro. So make no mistake, Google spent a lot of money making this phone. Whether or not Apple was the catalyst for Google to want to make the drastic change with this Pixel, we don't know the reason. But one thing is for sure, Apple played a big part in paying for it. So give a quick rundown on future Pixel 6 and Pixel 6 Pro specs. So now on paper, these phones look to be awesome. Not something you could say about a Pixel phone for a while. And I am insanely excited for these to come out. But the thing that gets me most excited is this little part right there. Google is making their own custom silicon for all of their new phones. And you might not realize how giant a deal it is that Google is going this route. So optimization in smartphones is clearly the name of the game for battery and just for a smoother experience. And Apple's been enjoying the benefits of hardware and software optimization for years on their phones, more recently Macs and iPads too, with the A series and now the M1 line of chips. It's one of the big reasons iPhones don't need to have as much RAM as most Android devices. It's not that Apple can't put 8, 12, 16, or whatever OnePlus is going to be doing by the time this video comes out on their phones. They just don't have to because of optimization. But the thought of combining Google's custom silicon with 8 or 12 gigabytes of RAM, Google's nutso camera, and their amazing software, the thought of that seems like the ultimate phone. So I'm crossing my fingers because I'm ready for it. But either way, other companies are starting to follow Apple's footsteps with making their own custom silicon, and I'm sure that Google won't be the last to do it. So I haven't talked about design, a radical new design for the Pixel 6 line. Now you're probably wondering how I'm going to bring this back to the beginning and suggest that Apple had anything to do with the design of these phones. Buckle up, we're about to do it. So Apple does not change designs very often, especially when it comes to the iPhone. So the iPhone 12 started a new squared off design, and iPhone 13 and likely 14 or 15 or whatever comes next for the few years will have an iteration of that same design. And there have been quite a few Android devices that have started to, say, borrow design ideas from iPhone, and on the Android side, more and more devices starting to look like variations of Samsung phones. So with most smartphones looking more and less like an iPhone or a Samsung phone, both of those companies have inadvertently given Google permission to not follow any design cues from either. So they went with something completely different from any phone that I've ever seen, and I think this was the smartest thing Google could have done. The Pixel 6 and 6 Pro will be instantly recognizable when you see it, and I love it. It's different, it's unlike anything else we've seen. It's hard to make a rectangle look unique. Google did it. And if the phone feels as good as it looks, just get in my pocket already. So I think it'd be one thing if it was a smaller, more kind of vulnerable phone company that took design risks like this, but this is Googs. If anyone had the funds and reach to go against the grain, it's them. So bringing all of this back, the money that's changing hands between Google and Apple is a surprising percentage of both companies' bottom lines. And while it would seem like a bad financial decision for Apple to sort of forego those billions of dollars coming from Google and go out on their own, they have the war chest and they have the capital to absorb a loss for a few years. On Google's side, them losing out on that information from a billion iPhones is a huge hit. But if they focus on the Pixel and make the Pixel the iPhone of Android, which by all accounts it should be, not only can they recoup the amount of information they can gather on you, for better or worse, but the ad revenue they have full control over. They can control what they're gonna show and they will know how much they're going to make from it. So perhaps this breakup of frenemies could eventually be the best for both companies and ultimately the consumer.